When you think about it, Trump's victory has little to do with either candidate. Yes, the Democrats rigging the election so that Bernie was given the shaft just so that Hillary would be the party's chosen candidate didn't really help things any. Also, her frequent behavior that made it clear that she believed that she was above the law, and also the fact that she did not get any punishment for her actions that both her status as a politician and perhaps as a woman protected her from. Let's be honest, shall we? What Hillary did basically amounted to treason against the U.S. And what's more, the fact that she made it clear that she intended to go and start war with Russia made it clear that, yes, she would not only be the first female president, but also the one responsible for sending us into a second Cold War, or the one kicking off World War III. I'm all for having a female president, however, not if it means that the person in charge is an out-and-out warmonger who, on several occasions, has made it very clear that she absolutely despises the average U.S. citizen. If we are actually going to put a woman in office, here is a revolutionary idea for you. How about putting someone that is both a woman and is actually qualified to do the damn job that is expected of them? Which, for those of you who haven't figured it out yet, the job of the U.S. President is the same as that of any other politician: to serve the people. Yes, a president is a more powerful servant, but they are still a servant to the people that put them in office, which conveniently brings me to the point of this video. The reason that Hillary lost and that Trump won actually has very little to do with either candidate at hand. In my opinion, Trump is not only better than Hillary, but also his faults and shortcomings are personal rather than legal. And, as an added bonus, he has no plans in attacking Russia. But even so, it doesn't change the fact that Trump is only a symptom and not a cause. To help illustrate this, first let me start off by asking you, who is it that you can freely attack in this country without any fear of reprisal? I'll give you a hint. It is not the African Americans, it is not women, and it is not the gay and transgender community. How often have we heard the following phrases? Die cis scum, blacks can't be racist, and of course, everyone's favorite, you're a white straight male! Now, yes, I will agree that being white, male, or straight does have its own set of privileges and benefits. However, the problem is that you are not allowed to acknowledge that being black, female, or gay or transgendered also has its own set of privileges and benefits as well. In fact, just to do you one even better, white male and heterosexuals were all told that these said benefits and privileges were invisible to them, and they can only be seen by people who were not white, straight, or male. Which really is just kind of a cruel joke when you realize it is like telling someone who can only see the color blue that there is currently a red unicorn standing in the room, and while given that they cannot see it, to just go ahead and take it on faith that such a thing actually exists. Naturally, anyone with a little bit of common sense is going to call bullshit on this. However, this is the narrative that the regressive left has ran with. Instead of trying to bring everyone together, all they have done is try to tear everyone apart. Instead of it being about one side actually wanting to help the other, it has instead been rephrased with the idea that one side is the victim of the other, which works great when you want to go and spin a victim narrative. However, in terms of actually solving anything, it tends to do very little, especially when you realize that by being a victim, you essentially give up all power and decision-making in terms of your own personal life. As a victim, you cannot do anything. You cannot make any choices. You cannot take any actions. In short, you are essentially left up to the whims and dictates of fate, which is to say, you're basically a helpless infant. For example, blacks cannot do anything to go and increase their current station in life, and the reason for this is because the white man is always holding them back. Now, of course, in reality that is untrue. While black people do have problems, most of them unfortunately are self-inflicted. For example, do you know what the common terms for an educated black person who has succeeded in rising above his or her current station in life is? Well, if you ask white people, the answer is successful, fortunate, and lucky. For black people, the words they use are race traitor, Uncle Tom, and coon. In short, in the black community, success is highly frowned upon. At least as far as getting an education, doing what is expected of you, and staying out of trouble with the law. These things are considered by many black people to be acting white. In short, something that one practices if they willfully want to deny being a black person, and is often seen as someone believing that they are better than the other black people around them. Which brings up this question. If this is what gets turned down, then what exactly is it that gets praised? Well, what not only gets praised, but outright deified in the black community is being a thug, a criminal, and a drug user. While this may all sound like something that the white man came up just to vilify black people, this really isn't the case. There have been plenty of black people who will argue that since the system that is in place was made by a white man, then that means, as a black person, that they should not be expected to follow the white man's rules. Now, of course, if anyone supports this, then I strongly urge you to go to China, North Korea, or any other country that is communist or dictatorship in nature, and as an outsider, start questioning the government. Let me know how that works out, assuming, of course, that they allow mail to be sent out by people who are being re-educated. However, as I am sure others will point out, it isn't that simple with black people. After all, the police kill more black people than they do white, therefore it must be racism, right? No! Not in the slightest! Keep in mind, black people only make up 13% of the population in the U.S. Now, I don't know about you, but if you are a minority of the population and you are the majority of the people committing crimes, then that should really tip you off that there is something wrong here. Naturally, you would expect that there to be more arrests per capita. However, even then, that is not the case. Turns out, in reality, more white people actually die in police shootings than black people do relevant to the amount of crimes being committed. So yes, blacks commit more crimes, but more white people get killed by the cops because, thanks to not wanting to look like a bunch of racists, the cops are going to be more hesitant when it comes to shooting black people. Which is all well and good as long as said black person doesn't have a gun and is firing at the police. This, unfortunately, is usually not the case. Of course, one has to wonder why it is more important when a black person dies than a white person dies, and the answer, of course, is what I've been saying all along. We have a victim narrative that needs to be fed into. When a black person gets killed by a cop, it's going to be all over the news. But when a white person gets killed by the cops, then oh well, they got what they deserve, so who really cares? Apparently, some white drug addict who gets killed while resisting arrest, or a white anything that gets killed by police while resisting arrest, just isn't going to make the news because no one cares. It's kind of like how there are more reports of plane crashes than they are of car crashes. And the reason for that is simple. Plane crashes are rare, whereas car crashes are more common. However, due to the massive reporting, it seems like the number is a lot higher than it really is. Not only that, but really, which do you think is going to sell more newspapers? Everything is just fine, the birds are singing, and everything is right with the world? Or, Trump has been elected president, and it's a sign of the apocalypse, cats and dogs are living together in perfect harmony! Etc., etc. Fact is, people just care more about black lies more than they do about white lies. Plus, we just go and keep pushing the good old victim narrative that blacks are victims while whites are evil racists who are hell-bent on making black lives as miserable as possible. It may not be true, but it does drive up the ratings, and it does get newspapers published, so it really doesn't matter if it's complete horse shit. Kind of like the entire hands up, don't shoot thing. What do you know? The guy never had his hands up at all. In fact, he was firing at the police. And like the racists they were, they actually went ahead and tried to defend their very lives by firing back. Now that I have thoroughly worn out the subject, what exactly does that actually have to do with Trump's victory? Well, think about it. The left has a narrative they want to tell, facts be damned. What's more, the entire idea seems to be painting one side as helpless angels and the other as a bunch of spiteful demons who are going out of their way to harass them every step of the way. In fact, this has become so common, whichever group is considered to be the bad guy now has to go and prove a negative. That is, that they are not something. Now then, going back to our dear blood black people for a moment, how do you think people would react if I went ahead and said that because someone is black, that they must prove that they are not a crook, a criminal, or a drug user, or a murderer, or a rapist in order to be considered someone that I would want to talk to? I'm pretty sure that a lot of people would lose their minds and call me the most racist person they've ever met. And I don't mean racism as in the entire, oh, you ain't Chinese food and you're white, you must be racist, because that's cultural appropriation. No. I'm not talking about that. I am talking about a white supremacist who routinely gives Nazi salutes. That's the kind of racism I'm talking about. And in fact, now that I think of it, the fact that the word racism has been diluted so much that you actually have to specify which form of racism you're talking about, that's not really a good thing. It's just really sad. But then again, it's like the same thing can be said for sexism and homophobia, but that's another story for another time. The point, though, is that asking someone to prove that they are not something, are you now, or have you ever been before, a member of the Communist Party, is not only rude, but is also downright insulting. The point, though, is when you're selecting a group of people, namely white, straight, and male, it is not only considered okay to expect the other party to have to do this, but in some circumstances even expected. However, it doesn't stop there. Well, everything I have just said is completely legitimate and valid. The kind of responses that I can expect from everything that I've had to say will have the same artistic merit and forethought of someone just typing in "fucking bigot" and hitting the reply button without even considering a single point that I brought up. And that, of course, is assuming they even went through the trouble of listening to my video to begin with. Which, given the behavior of the regressive left, SJWs, and feminists, isn't going to be very likely, since why should you consider an opposing point of view when you can just call them Hitler and be done with it? It's a lot faster, it saves you a bunch of time, and it makes you look like an innocent angel and the other guy look like Satan. For example, I propose that we give all children handguns. Why? Well, this way they can protect themselves. And not just from people who would go and attack them, but also from rapists, kidnappers, and everything else. So if you don't support giving kids guns, then by logic, that means you must go and be a terrible person, because only a terrible person would not go and want kids to be able to defend themselves. And not only that, but what if the person attacking them is actually a pedophile? Do you support pedophilia? Well, if not, then you will go and support me giving kids guns, or you support pedophiles. Same logic, people. There really is no other way of looking at it. Either you agree with me, or you're what I say you are, even though I have no proof and you're going on my word alone. Kind of like how if I say you're a racist or a sexist, you must also go and be homophobic and whatever else I say you are, because hey, if you're one thing, you might as well be all of them. You know what I'm saying? I mean, I don't have any proof for the thing I called you, but I have any proof for everything else. But it makes you look bad, and because we're using emotional arguments here, no one's going to go and think to question me, so why wouldn't I use it? Instead of actually using facts and reason, let's just stick to emotional arguments and manipulate people like they're chess pieces on a board. Apparently, it doesn't matter if what you're saying is true or not. All that matters is that you are not bending over to go and kiss some poor, pathetic victim's ass and then self-flagellate yourself as you go on about how you are such a terrible human being and that all the problems that person is facing happens to be your fault. Apparently, when you display any behavior or thought that will differentiate you from a doormat, then you are considered to be a terrible human being who wishes nothing but pain and suffering upon anyone that is remotely different than you. And that must be the case, because if that weren't the case, then why are you not accepting that everything this person is suffering is your own personal fault? Well, The short answer is for the exact same reason that I don't believe that I have a right to go and start killing Jews because of what they did to Jesus over 2,000 years ago. Yes, once again, they are unearned rights and privileges for being born the way I am. Just as you have unearned rights and privileges for being born as different than I am. However, get this. What sins may or may not have happened during the past has nothing to do with me. Nothing. Nada. In fact, it really doesn't matter what my ancestors did. Because, you know why? Simple. I'm not my ancestors. I know! That's amazing, isn't it? I'm actually my own person. Who knew? And so, if we can agree that I am my own person, then the idea of me actually having to answer for the sins of another person that you and I both know that I did not commit or partake in or even accept or justify, that is not only unjust, but it's also insulting. My sins, as well as my virtues, are all mine. I will of course gladly answer for any wrongdoings I personally have done. However, as for the wrongdoings of another, all that I can tell you is that you must take it up with that person in their turn. And since they're dead, I don't really see how you're going to go and get them to answer for anything that they did or did not do. Just let it go. I'm not saying to forget the past. I'm saying remember the past, but quit looking back to it because you cannot go forward and look back to the past at the same time. You must live in the present looking forward to the future, or you must remain in the present and keep looking back to the past. But you cannot do both. And yet, sad to say, this is the biggest shortcoming that the regressive leftists do not get. Rather than realizing that people are individuals and make their own decisions, they instead prefer to go and group us together and actually believe that the actions of one are the actions of all. All this is doing is separating groups of people. Whites against black, men against women, straight against gay. The entire idea that things are not black and white, but instead some shade of gray, has never even occurred to any of the far left-leaning people. Surprisingly, yes, it is possible for black people to be racist, just as it's possible for women to be sexist, and for the gay and transgender community to be heterophobic. I know. These people are not pillars of marble and ivory, but are made of the same dirt and clay as the rest of us. How about that? This is why Donald Trump won. Simply put, people are just tired of being told they are terrible human beings and that they are personally responsible for an entire group of people suffering. What we need right now isn't more division, but rather more things that will bring us closer together. And yes, even as I say this, I am aware that Trump has his own personal shortcomings to answer for during his campaign. However, compared to a warmonger who believes that she is above the law and that rules and regulations are for lesser people and is willing to pander to whoever and whatever will go and keep her in power, consequences be damned if it results in war, more social strife, and greater injustice being committed. In short, like it or not, Trump is the lesser of two evils. And just because he may try to pass off one of his terrible ideas, that does not mean the American people has to go and accept it. If Trump does anything that I personally do not agree with, then yes, I will oppose that idea. Just because I voted for the man does not necessarily mean I agree with everything that will come out of his mouth. I do have my own mind after all. Something that most feminists and SJW seem to have forgotten since they have sacrificed rational thinking and substituted it instead with following the crowd and being an ideologue. I do not want people to think like me. I want people to think. This is the problem with the regressive left. They have gone so far left that Poe's law is now in effect. And worse yet, much like the right during the 1980s, this is what the Democratic Party has become. A corrupt, oppressive regime that wants to micromanage people's lives and treat people as they were idiots and imbeciles. In fewer words, what has happened here can easily be summed up as horseshoe politics. That is, at their very extreme, that two unlike groups have more in common than they do differences. As things stand right now at this point in time, ironically, the right is now the one championing free speech and diverse opinions, something that is seen as inherently evil to the Democratic Party. Apparently, when it comes to diversity, the left will talk day in and day out about how we need more women, blacks, and homosexuals in business and education. And this is all well and good, even if they have to rig the system in favor of said groups. Because apparently, since we are all equal in everything, then of course that means giving the other side unfair treatment at the expense of the other. Because once upon a time, in a land far, far away, someone's great-great-great-grandfather did something stupid to said person's ancestor, and that makes punishing and taking advantage of the current generation A-okay. Because, reasons. We need to get beyond this. We need to quit looking to the past because doing so deprives us of our future. Again, it is important to remember the past, but it is even more important to learn the lessons of what went right, as well as to remember what went wrong. However, you can no longer live in the past any more than you can in some future far off removed from the present. What's past is past, and all that we can do now is look towards the future and try to carve out a brighter tomorrow. But again, that will not happen unless we are willing to forgive and forget. I really do not care about someone's race, gender, or sexual orientation. I care about how they act as a human being, which is to say, what they do is more important than what they are. Yes! I understand. You are a transgendered Muslim African-American lesbian with cerebral palsy and a bad case of Tourette's. But beyond that, what are you really? What are you as a human being? And what have you done and accomplished that is worth us paying you any attention or listening to what you have to say? Because I am telling you right now, what you were born as is a lot less important than what you have done as a person. And yes, I do find it very depressing that there are people out there who are saying that race, gender, and sexual orientation don't matter, and therefore we should all strive to not be like those white straight men. Enough with the hypocrisy. Enough with the bigotry. I am tired of the doublethink and the proto-newspeak. If you are convinced that people should be silenced and forced to think alike, and be like one another, then please go to China, where you can become just another red Maoist ant marching on the anthill that is known as communism. If freedom of speech and the democratic way is so offensive to you, then please go to those countries that by law outlaws such behavior. Just keep in mind that when the government does something you disagree with and steps on another person's rights because they can, that you protesting in the street is only going to go and be met with the blunt force of a number of truncheons as the police beat you mercilessly in the head and then cart you off as a political prisoner for education. Please keep in mind that by giving up yours and others like you the right to voice civil dissent, then you cannot question the will of the government, which by logic dictates that the atrocities of the Holocaust and the various acts of enslavement that has gone on throughout the course of human history cannot be criticized, and in fact can only be outright enforced since said acts were performed with full willful intent by the form of government that existed at that time. The left has gone on to say how terrible and self-obsessed the right is, and yet when it comes to issues like Brexit and Trump's victory, what do? Riot in the street and threaten violence, and in the case of Trump, outright assassination. Am I to believe that if the cases were reversed, where Brexit did not happen and Hillary claimed victory, that the left would look upon members of the right with understanding at the result of their loss? Personally, I don't believe they would. In fact, if anything, they would just use that as further proof that the right is degenerate and immoral, and yet, here it is, finding itself in similar circumstances that members of the left are behaving in the very manner they would have found detestable should a member of the right do it. We live in a democracy. The fact that you do not always get your way and have to accept that other opinions are just as valid as yours is not evidence that the system is failing, but rather that it is succeeding. For how long have these people been told that by the way they were born, that they were inherently corrupt and evil, and when they spoke out, were not met with sympathy but further demonization? The left has grown corrupt, and is only seeking to control those that it was originally meant to serve. I refuse to live on my knees. being allowed only to voice that which has already been deemed as acceptable and true, and being forced to keep my inner thoughts and feelings to myself, lest I be deemed a social outcast for the ostentatious crime of wrongthink. Say what you will about Trump, but I can tell you only this. His victory has less to do with the right and people who oppose the SJW and feminists. For in truth, it is the SJW and the feminists that has given Donald Trump his current victory. Keep in mind, Trump is not a cause of anything that has come before, but again, is only a symptom of it. People have been oppressed far too much for far too long, and they have grown tired of it. They are tired of being told what to do, what to think, and how to act. They want to be the ones who are making those decisions instead of allowing others to make them for them. Trump may not be a great man, but in the current environment, he may make a great president. We need change, and, as Democrats frequently like to say, things are worse now than they were X number of years ago, then apparently we have suffered long enough under the last rule, and now it is time for the changing of the guards. The Democrats have tried and failed miserably. Let's give the Republicans a chance and see if they can't do any better.